to be read by the Deputy Premier.
Attitude of prayer. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech Thee so to direct and prosper the duration of the Parliament now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundation for the glory of Thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth II, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Parliament, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of Cabinet, ex-official members, members of the Parliament, the Chief Justice, and members of the Judiciary, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for Thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name, Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make His face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of His countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Proceedings of this Honourable Parliament are now resumed.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Report of the Standing Finance Committee on the appropriation changes in accordance with Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act 2020 revision for the financial year ended 31st of December 2021. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the schedule of appropriation changes sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act 2020 revision with respect to the government's financial year ending 31st of December 2021.
So ordered. Is the Honourable Deputy Premier speaking?
Briefly, Mr. Speaker, briefly. Can I get a lectern, please? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 67-4, I have tabled the Standing Finance Committee's report on the schedule of appropriation changes sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act 2020 revision with respect to the government's financial year ending 31st of December 2021. Mr. Speaker, the committee had its first meeting on Monday the 19th of July 2021, at which time Finance Committee scrutinized and questioned the items appearing on the previously mentioned schedule, as well as changes that were proposed to the schedule. Mr. Speaker, the committee also met today, 21st of July 2021, to finalize and approve the report, which has just been tabled. Mr. Speaker, the committee considered the schedule of appropriation changes put before the committee and also considered further changes that were proposed to the schedule. The committee approved the schedule of appropriation changes sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act, and it approved the further changes proposed to the schedule. Mr. Speaker, in terms of individually significant items that the committee approved, the single largest appropriation change was that the committee approved was $27.5 million for the continuation of the stipend payable to eligible persons previously employed in the tourism industry to mitigate some of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, other significant amounts approved by the committee were $17.6 million of extra funding with respect to tertiary health care for indigents, seamen, and veterans who are referred for treatment locally and overseas. The committee also approved $10 million to support operations of Cayman Islands Airport Authority, and this, Mr. Speaker, should be noted that this $10 million is in addition to the $20.9 million loan that the government has advanced the authority to provide financial assistance to enable authority to meet this obligation, particularly capital expenditure matters. Mr. Speaker, $8.8 million was also approved to fund remaining commitments for the long-term residential mental facility, as well as another $7 million to support the operation of Cayman Airways. Mr. Speaker, $4 million was also approved for additional funding for road surface upgrades, and $3.1 million of additional funding with respect to services to regular migrants arriving in the Cayman Islands. The committee also approved, Mr. Speaker, $2 million for major road networks, and also $2 million for additional funding for the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center Limited. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the committee also enabled $2 million for grants to grants to micro and small businesses. Mr. Speaker, as the proceedings in Finance Committee were publicly aired and can still be viewed online, there isn't a need for me to present in greater detail items considered by Finance Committee. But I would like to close, Mr. Speaker, by saying that the committee agreed that the report that has just been laid on the table of this Honourable Parliament be the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the schedule of appropriation changes sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act 2020 revision with respect to the government's financial year ending 31st of December 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministry of Employment and Border Control, Cayman Islands Government, Annual Report 2019-2020, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Border Control and Labor.
Honorable the Deputy Premier, Minister of Border Control.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable Parliament the annual report of the Ministry of Employment and Border Control for the year 2019 to 2020.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking?
This time, Mr. Speaker, definitely briefly. Mr. Speaker, I just want to, first of all, thank all the capable staff, the capable and able staff at the Ministry of Border Control and Employment. Just so you know, Mr. Speaker, this report is actually quite thick, and it's actually a good read, but I just want to say that this report includes the departments of CBC, otherwise, Customs and Border Control Services, otherwise known as CBC, Department of Labor and Pension, Passport and Corporate Services Offices, Workforce Opportunity and Residency Cayman, otherwise known as WORK, and also the Cayman Islands Regiment. Mr. Speaker, I just want to also highlight that this department, or this annual report, also looks at activities of the Business Staff and Plan Board, the Cayman BRAC and Little Cayman Immigration Board, the Cayman Status and Permanent Residency Board, the Work Permit Board, the National Pension Boards, and the Labor Tribunals and the Labor Appeals Tribunal. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry received a clean audit from the Auditor General, and as such, I think that's pretty much it on the report, but it's very thick and it's a good bedtime reading. But I just want to say thanks again to the staff for their work. Thank you.
2020 Annual Report, Public Service Pension Board, Securing Tomorrow Together, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Deputy Governor.
The Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Parliament the 2020 Annual Report for the Public Service Pension Board, Securing Tomorrow Together.
So ordered. Is the Deputy Governor speaking?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Briefly, I think it's absolutely important that I share with this Honorable House and members of the public some of the highlights of the Public Service Pension Board during the 2020. Mr. Speaker, the Public Service Pension Board, PSPB, manages three distinct plans: the Public Service Pension Plan, the Parliamentary Pensions Plan, and the Judicial Pensions Plan. Additionally, it administers ex gratia payments, pension payments, which are directly funded by the government. Mr. Speaker, some of the key milestones in 2020 were as follows. The return on the Public Service Pension Board fund was 15.5%. As at the 31st of December 2020, the PSBB had US $1,193 in assets, and the Public Service Pension Board fund grew by US $170 million. In terms of administrative milestones, the PSBB processed 2,375 plan member files, conducted 4,933 one-on-one meetings with members, processed 128 new retirements, recorded 1,057 interactions with members, and processed 80 transfers during COVID-19 shelter-in-place provisions, and delivered 16 presentations to 409 members. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to highlight that despite the challenges of COVID-19, on the 30th of April 2020, the PSBB signed a contract with an external provider to deliver a new customizable pension administrative system. This partnership paved the way for work to begin on developing a new system that will allow the board to enhance member services. Also in 2020, the government continued with plans to top up the pensions of long-serving public servants to align minimum pensions with the level of poor relief. To enact this change, the PSBB, in partnership with the POCS, undertook the necessary measures to assess the eligibility and implement the new minimum pension threshold of $850 per month for pensioners, which was increased to $950 in 2021. The PSBB team completed all of the uplifts on behalf of the eligible plan members. Additionally, the PSBB administered over 1,000 ex gratia and ex gratia uplift payments on a monthly basis throughout 2020. Mr. Speaker, during one of the most challenging years throughout the world, the PSBB responded in a successful manner in both operations and investment growth. In a year where it would have been easy to blame a pandemic on any shortfall, the Cayman Islands benefit from a sound and ethical response from leaders in the country to ensure our citizens were protected, and further, that a pension provider like the Public Service Pension Board could continue to thrive during unprecedented times. Mr. Speaker, the PSBB not only continues to be the only pension plan in the Cayman Islands that is beyond $1 billion in assets, but the Public Service Pension Fund maintains outstanding gains over the year, and as of the 31st of December, as I said earlier, they crossed the $1 billion threshold US. In 2020, Mr. Speaker, specific to the PSBB, the fund experienced significant growth in 2020 with a return of 15.5%. To achieve this, the fund holds a diverse portfolio of bonds and equity securities that, over the long term, provides above-average returns with minimized variability. Mr. Speaker, strong investment returns were not just as a result of the market that rebounded in 2020. It was also a direct result of the increased investment management and oversight that led to a much quicker recovery from the pandemic recession than the industry peers of the PSPB. With that, the fund ended the year ahead of its investment fund policy benchmark by 1.2%. Further to these gains, the quarterly credited return applied to members' accounts in 2020, we all positive, and it demonstrates that the investment approach of smoothing any market volatility benefited our plan members. Mr. Speaker, also in 2020, the PSPB welcomed Mr. Brian Bothwell, a Caymanian with over 35 years of financial industry experience in the Cayman Islands, as a governor-appointed member of the PSPB Board of Directors. Mr. Bothwell's background is audit and governance and helping to shape the ongoing focus and delivery of the Public Service Pension Board's Audit and Risk Committee, which he chairs. In addition to the noteworthy accomplishments that I have highlighted, the PSPB prepared their financial statements for the year ending 31st of December 2020 and submitted them to the Auditor General and was issued an unqualified opinion. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the PSPB met all statutory requirements in preparing, submitting, and completing the audit of the financial statements. Mr. Speaker, to wind up, having provided you with the key highlights, I am sure that you will agree that the Public Service Pension Board performance, both operationally and financially, was impressive, especially against a backdrop of global uncertainty due to the pandemic. I would like to sincerely thank the Managing Director, Ms. Jewel Evans-Lindsay, and her team, and Chairperson, Ms. Sherry E. Banks of the Board, and other distinguished members of the Board of Directors for their commitment and sound leadership. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Annual Report 2018, National Drug Council, Cayman Islands, Annual Report 2019, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness.
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Minister. I beg today to place before this Honourable House the annual reports and audited financial statements for the National Drug Council for the fiscal years 2018 and 2019.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking?
No, sir, I will not be. Thank you.
Financial Report and Authority, Cayman Islands Government, Portfolio of Legal Affairs, Annual Report, 1st of January to the 31st of December 2020, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Attorney General.
The Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek leave of this Honourable Parliament to lay on the table the annual report for the Financial Reporting Authority for the period 1 January to 31st December 2020.
So ordered. Is the Attorney General speaking?
Mr. Speaker, just to point out to those who would wish to read, and I would recommend that it be read, that the report succinctly sums up on page 5 the activities of the authority during the relevant period. And I certainly commend the report to honourable members of this Parliament and to the wider public, Mr. Speaker, and to also use the opportunity to say thanks to the Director of the FRA, Mr. Robert R.J. Berry, and his staff for a wonderful job, for their professionalism and dedication throughout the relevant period and beyond, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions to Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet?
None.
Statements by the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
I have been informed by the Honourable the Premier Honourable the Premier. and the Honorable Minister of Tourism afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have pondered long and hard various remarks made about the reopening of our borders, and the more I listen and read what I regard as some of the irresponsible utterances and comments, the more I'm convinced that I must make a clear and firm, or take a clear and firm stance against the wave of misinformation, selfish behavior, and apathy that I think is placing us all at risk. Have we all forgotten, Mr. Speaker, how much we've had to give up in the early days of COVID to stay safe? Have we forgotten that COVID is a killer? Have we forgotten how we were all in this together to keep all of our people safe? Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of the adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Especially when I think of the sad irony that it is many of the same people who have attempted to dissuade us or even oppose the previous government's policies aimed at burning out the virus, who are now voicing opinions and complaints that our safe reopening plan won't work. At that time, Mr. Speaker, many of them refused to be convinced that closing our borders, lockdowns, curfews, mask wearing, and limiting numbers of people for gatherings, all the things that help keep us safe, was the right thing to do. Now, Mr. Speaker, some of the very same people are warning our government to abandon our gradual, measured, and scientific approach to reopening. Instead, in their view, we should simply throw open our doors to those who would come to our shores, spend their money, and bring COVID with them. I understand, I get it, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we must eventually open our borders. I know we have to get visitors and their money back into our economy. We must all accept that. But I also get the fact that if we do, as the Leader of the Opposition has suggested, Mr. Speaker, and reopen our borders to tourism on the 1st of September, we would be putting our people in grave danger, literally. I go to enough funeral services for our loved ones as it is, sir. I certainly don't want to have to go to more because this government bowed under pressure and reintroduced contagion into our community before we are fully prepared. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I will agree that we must adjust our way of thinking away from expecting to completely eradicate the existence of COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. So indeed, we must all prepare to exist in a world alongside COVID. Therefore, since it is not going away anytime soon, we must exercise wisdom, be guided by the science, and give our community every chance to successfully unlock our economy and reintroduce tourism. However, this cannot be done if we do not protect our vulnerable, limit the potential spread of the virus, and keep our healthcare system from becoming overwhelmed. COVID-19 is very much out there. I will not say it's lurking about. No, it is aging, and the new Delta variant is one mutation that is proving to be a most formidable and lethal foe. We must remain on guard because the ones who are going to get sick are the people who refuse to get vaccinated, the most vulnerable, and our children who cannot yet get vaccinated. And a word to our healthy young people: the virus does not discriminate on age. Many of those, Mr. Speaker, who are getting seriously ill around the world are unvaccinated young people. Mr. Speaker, I understand that there are people who cannot get vaccinated for medical reasons. They are the ones that we must all get vaccinated for as well. We continue to urge those unable to get vaccinated to use all safety protocols, including wearing masks whenever they go out in public. But for the rest of the population that is eligible to receive the vaccine, but for various non-medical reasons have not yet done so, I am once again asking you to roll up your sleeve. It is not just about you. It's about our economy, it's about our community, it's about the interests of our country. And I especially want to highlight that we have another group that we need to collectively rally around, and that is our children who are too young to get the vaccine. Mr. Speaker, there are many people in this chamber today who have children and grandchildren younger than 12. Likewise, many people listening to the sound of my voice or watching this broadcast and broadcast of these proceedings enjoy the blessing that is being a parent or grandparent to a young child. Are we as a community really going to insist that we rush ahead with a full reopening of the economy in September, placing our precious children and grandchildren in danger? Really? Have they considered these newborn babies when they make their comments about bringing forward the full reopening? I can tell you that the health, safety, and well-being of our precious young children were at the forefront of my mind when we deliberately chose to avoid schools opening for the full term simultaneously with the initial opening of the borders to tourists, which is what we would do if we accepted the proposal to open borders on the 1st of September, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that was one risk that neither I nor this PAC government is prepared to accept. And I'm confident that the opposition will agree with me that none of us knowingly would want to risk the lives of our young children or grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, I want to again appeal to the opposition as we enter this new phase of reversing the restrictive measures that have protected us. I want to encourage them to continue to take the high road and avoid the slippery slope of making political hay with a rapidly evolving public health issue. The good Lord knows, Mr. Speaker, I was lobbied, entreated, encouraged by many members of the private sector to oppose the previous administration when we were under those tight COVID restrictions. I had calls from people, as I've said before, asking me to exert whatever influence I may have had at that time to get the government to change their position so that we could get a little ease up. Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't apply that pressure. I didn't respond to the request because I agreed with the last administration's cautious approach to keep COVID out of our community and to keep us all healthy and safe. That caution and their decisions were made on the advice, Mr. Speaker, of the very same people who are advising this government today. What has changed, Mr. Speaker? We are still under threat, and so is the rest of the world. And the threat appears to be increasing at this point rather than decreasing. As many of us do, I continue to observe the virus as it spikes the world over, and I am keen to see how different countries are reacting. Mr. Speaker, the British Virgin Islands is certainly on my radar because it is a fellow British overseas territory where the number of people infected has gone in less than 2 weeks from zero or near zero to more than 2,000. This past Saturday, the BVI government decided to hold an emergency vaccination drive. Certainly in relation to those who are currently sick and infected, and those who have passed on, it's maybe a little too late. Too little too late. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, of the 16 deaths and more than 30 hospitalizations in the BVI, including some on ventilators or high concentrated oxygen, only one of those persons had received the vaccine. So it is their unvaccinated who are being most affected by the virus there. Theirs is not a unique situation, Mr. Speaker, but it is clearly illuminating. The world over, it is clear that this is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That is why the PAC government insisted on a vaccination drive in May, and why we are going to be holding another one shortly. It is a proven fact that vaccination gives your body the best ability to fight the virus. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a moment to reflect on some of the lessons we can learn from our friends and neighbors in the BVI. They were letting in travelers who had been fully vaccinated, giving them a PCR test at the airport and forcing them to quarantine for 24 hours to just await the test result. If the result was negative, the visitors were allowed to roam freely throughout the country. So obviously a very short period of quarantine. Unvaccinated travelers, Mr. Speaker, had to quarantine for a mere 7 days and allowed free range of test if the test on the last day was negative. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that their approach has been significantly different to our own so far. So today, the residents of the BVI are living with added restrictions and lockdowns, and the pain and suffering that comes from the deaths that have occurred, sir. Mr. Speaker, I do not want our country to suffer the loss of people we know and love, then have to go back into lockdowns and curfews and other possible harsh restrictions. Mr. Speaker, we have also seen other countries that have attempted to ignore the established science, and what a price they've paid. In the Netherlands, where 46% of the population has received 2 doses and 77% received 1 dose of the vaccine, COVID-19 infections have exploded by more than 500% over the last week, after the government removed all restrictions and limitations. However, due to the massive spike in infections, plans have been reversed, with social distancing being reintroduced and bars and restaurants and nightclubs closed once again to indoor service. Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is they too attempted to defy the science and have been heavily criticized, in particular for such things as a special incentive program that had been run, which encouraged young people to take a single-shot vaccine, with the implication that they could go out partying sooner, sometimes hours after receiving their first dose. However, that was in the face of official advice for people to wait 2 weeks after their shot to build up maximum immunity. And furthermore, we see many scientists and medical professionals around the world questioning the efficacy of the much-vaunted UK Freedom Day. Broadcasts around the world, Mr. Speaker, were showing people gathering in clubs and bars and hugging and kissing and reveling in the fact that after a year and a half, they were free to interact. But stick a pin there, Mr. Speaker. Let's see how high the infection rates soar now that people have been given the freedom to be responsible for their own actions and ultimately possibly irresponsible. We cannot outsmart the proven science behind this. In fact, the real experiment that is being conducted is not with the vaccine, as some suggest, Mr. Speaker, but with those attempting to reopen their economies and borders to the world without any form of protection for their most vulnerable, without high vaccination rates, and without maintaining other appropriate safety protocols. Do we need to go down the road that France has taken, and more recently the UK, belatedly? Require a health pass to venues such as cinemas, bars, restaurants, hospitals, planes, and other forms of public transportation? Is that where we need to go, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the short answer may be yes, if we have to. If we do not collectively do the right thing and get vaccinated, I can assure you that this government will be prepared to take the measures we need to. Some may call them draconian, Mr. Speaker. But if they are necessary to protect our people in these islands, they may be just that, necessary. Mr. Speaker, it seems that some people view reopening as some kind of limbo dance with a pole set ablaze. They simply focus on how low we can go with the setting the vaccination rate and want us to aim for the lowest possible rate in order to get life back to normal. Well, Mr. Speaker, the growing evidence based on observations or our observations of these experiments and experiences in other places is that even with the vaccine, we cannot necessarily expect a normal lifestyle. To keep the Cayman Islands and our people safe, our approach, Mr. Speaker, is similar to that being taken in Singapore. Like us, Singapore was quick to shut its borders, implement a comprehensive tracing and testing program, and impose quarantine requirements early on. Also like us, Mr. Speaker, Singapore in June unveiled the country's roadmap to a new normal, in which they will focus on medical outcomes such as how many fall sick, how many are in intensive care units, how many need to be intubated for oxygen. Like us, they will let science and medicine determine their next step in reopening Singapore's borders. Unlike us, Mr. Speaker, Singapore wants the number of vaccinated people in their country to be 90 to 95%. Their health minister said Singapore would be lucky in an admission if it got to 80% of its 5.69 million populace vaccinated. We know, Mr. Speaker, that our target of 80% is a challenge too. But it is a challenge we must meet. We estimate our population to be 71,106, and we are taking Public Health England's advice to get 80% of our population vaccinated. So far, Mr. Speaker, only 66% of our population has had the 2-dose course of the vaccine. Now that is to be celebrated, but at the same time, we know it's insufficient. Mr. Speaker, we can and must do better. For emphasis on why we need to do better, I hearken back to our children, sir. Those younger than 12. We fret and fuss over our babies when they have the sniffles, the common cold, when they fall and hurt themselves. I cannot imagine, Mr. Speaker, the fretting and hand-wringing a parent or grandparent would do if their precious child was in ICU in one of our hospitals, fighting COVID, fighting to breathe, fighting for their lives. It's not just the immediate effects of catching the disease either, Mr. Speaker. There is also that thing called long COVID to consider, and that is when the symptoms of COVID persist over extended time. And while researchers are not clear yet why symptoms persist in young people, and some adults, some do agree that the effects could be the result of organ damage caused by the virus. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask grandparents and parents in this country, again, are you really willing to risk the lives of your dear little ones by demanding the reopening of our borders too soon or refusing to get the vaccine? Mr. Speaker, I will leave us with the words of Dr. Peter Hotez, a vaccinologist and dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in the United States, in a comment to a CNN reporter. And I quote, "Transmission will continue to accelerate, and the ones who will also pay the price, in addition to the unvaccinated adolescents, are the little kids who depend on the adults and adolescents to get vaccinated in order to slow or halt transmission." Mr. Speaker, I'd ask everyone listening to please let that sink in, particularly those who would insist on carelessly throwing open the doors to travelers when we're unprepared and at a time when it can do us harm. Consider his words as those out there who are stubbornly resisting taking the vaccine maintain that view, sir. Think about his statement for anyone who's considering introducing politics into a public health issue. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking everyone to do the right thing. Get vaccinated now. Unlike many countries, Mr. Speaker, where there is no option and desperation exists as a result, we have the world's best vaccine available here for free. I'm imploring people, do not waste your opportunity to be a part of our solution to reopen while keeping your family and children and the loved ones of all others in this great country as safe as possible, sir. And I ask the opposition and all residents to unite with us on this issue, on this critical issue, Mr. Speaker, and let my government do its job of taking the advice of the experts, using science to embark on the safest way to reopen the borders of the Cayman Islands. I thank you for allowing me to make this statement, Mr. Speaker.
I have been informed by the Honorable Minister of Tourism of a statement.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
Honorable
Speaker.
Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The statement will be rather short. As per the outline in the government's strategic policy statement, the PAC administration has started to take the necessary actions to fulfill our broad outcomes, specifically those in outcome number 5, 5A, building a legacy of sustainability, to offer incentive programs to encourage recycling and reduce waste. And as such, Mr. Speaker, the Park administration has decided we will no longer be using plastic water bottles in this honorable house, at least on the government side, and we will be using reusable bottles in this honorable parliament. As you may see, all members of government has them, and we're going to offer and ask the Sergeant-at-Arms, as we have them labeled for each one of the members of opposition, to support the government's outcome and the broad outcomes, section 5, to continue to encourage recycling and reduce waste in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, Honorable Minister, you are giving to the opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. We didn't pass them over until we wanted to make the announcement. These water bottles, I want to say thanks to my ministry. I want to note that the elected member for Bordentown East has his already on the opposition side. But these bottles were donated to the government through my ministry as it's a promotion for the Cayman Islands. And I think what better way to show our commitment to sustainability and reduction of waste in our country to no longer use plastic bottles in this parliament.
Well, the color is very appropriate and the purpose is very laudable. I trust that the Speaker's office will get one and wouldn't have to report that.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as you also have seen, the Honourable Deputy Governor and the Honourable Attorney General has received one, and I will ensure that yourself and your staff members will receive one as well, sir.
Thank you very much.
Personal explanations? None. Obituary and other ceremonial speeches?
None?
Raising of matter of privileges?
None.
Government business?
I am not aware of any other business, except I should have said so earlier that I did have apologies from the member from Georgetown West and Georgetown South who were unable to be present today. The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to all members for their good work today. Mr. Speaker, I would now move the adjournment of this Honourable House. Sine die.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable the member for Georgetown North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just rise to ask if the opposition have a number of outstanding parliamentary questions. Will these be, or are we requesting that these be carried over to the next sitting?
I am sure that, Honorable Member, that the outstanding questions will be dealt with in the usual manner according to standing orders. The question is that this Honorable Parliament do now stand adjourned. Sine die. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. This Honorable Parliament stands adjourned. Sine die.